Today I wanted to share a little bit about my work with the experience of seeking, receiving, and following guidance from a perceived divine source. That was my dissertation topic, and it was also my lived inquiry at that time as well, and continues to be a major lived inquiry stream for myself. Um, Kind of evolved over the years, but after I graduated from the American Film Institute and got swept into the Hollywood fast lane, I had a kind of spiritual crisis. 3 months after I graduated, I was meeting with all the studio heads and having lunch at the Polo Lounge. I was house sitting for a television star who was a friend of mine. And so 3 months after film school, there I was in a palatial estate, driving around beautiful cars and meeting all the big people. And that was my 15 minutes of fame, as they say. But it was very strange. I had a very hard time, partly because my graduate film was Voice in Exile, which was a story about a stutterer, which I believe I've already talked about. So it was a very personal vision quest for me, and I was just raw. I mean, it opened up so much for me. So after that happened, then I found myself in this wild world where I had no idea what was happening under the surface, the political machinations that were happening just beyond my perceptual field. And I was ill-prepared for it, both because of what I went through and just my own personality and stuff like that. As I said before, I'm a hypersensitive person, so some people say I'm an empath, very empathic, so I pick up. I really kind of absorb other people's feelings, and I pick up mixed signals really kind of loudly, and I don't know what to do with them sometimes. So all of these things, but anyways, and there was a lot of lost souls that I encountered. And so one day I was sitting poolside at this estate I was house sitting for. And just to give you a picture of this, the pool was a synthesized grotto with rocks and waterfalls and different pools. So it looked like you were in nature, but not really. It was quite beautiful, actually. Anyways, there I was on a lounge chair, a chaise lounge, I guess, mirrored sunglasses on the phone with my agent, who was telling me something we both knew wasn't true, but that was the game we were playing. And in the pool was a young naked lady who I had just met the night before, and she was looking at me like I was a god or something. And in that moment, it was like I heard the music from the Twilight Zone. It was like, what is going on here? And I realized I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know who I was. I felt like people like my agent I was a property. This woman in the pool, she didn't really know me, but she perhaps, was probably projecting a little bit, and also attracted to my talent, or I was the new kid in town, and she knew that. I don't know, but it was like this moment where nothing was real. And I felt it in my being, and it was kind of a spiritual awakening, and I realized if I don't get out of here, I'm going to lose myself. And so I packed up everything I owned, put it in storage, and went off overseas to Europe with just a backpack. And it was an amazing experience. And I encountered two different major experiential streams when I was traveling. One stream was everything was magical. I was meeting all these cool people. I was in the right place at the right time. Everything was beautiful unfolding. It was amazing. And then these other times where everything was going wrong. It was kind of really extreme. And I started to kind of observe it and try to figure out what was going on. And what I discovered was I was in the times where everything was going beautifully and miraculously and smoothly, I was totally surrendering and just in the moment. Whereas the other times when everything was going wrong, I had plans, I was projecting forward, and then I discovered that the intense, troubling times, everything going wrong, helped me to get to a point where I totally surrendered and could be in the moment. And then I was in the moment for a while, and then my mind came back in and trying to plan stuff. So once I realized that, I started to really kind of feel like, how can I really work with this? How can I work with this? And I met this woman in the south of France, I think in San Rafael, and we hit it off. We were talking, and she told me about this book called The Course in Miracles, and she talked to me a little bit about living from guidance and just surrendering to the moment. And I did some experiments after we went our separate ways, and I started to get really into it. And then there was this moment where I was riding the train into Rome, and I had planned on going to Rome, but I was doing this meditation that she had taught me, and all of a sudden I got this deep inner voice, like clear inner voice, saying, "Stay on the train. Do not get off at Rome." And it was so strong, and I felt like, you know what? I have to do this. It's so clear. I have to play this out. So I sat there, and everyone got off and on, whatever they had to do, and then the train continued south. And then I thought to myself, I should ask where the end of this line goes. And the voice says, do not ask. Let go. And just go to the end of the line wherever it is. And I did it. I was like, okay, all right. And I ended up in Salerno, which is mid-southern Italy. I think it's at the edge of the Amalfi Coast. And I got there at midnight, and I thought, oh my God, everything's closed. How am I going to find a pension, a hotel? And once again, the guidance said, walk over there and knock on that door. I did. Somebody was up. They let me in. It was perfect, all that. So I ended up in Amalfi, on the Amalfi Coast. I spent some time there, and then I was headed along the coast from there towards Positano. Beautiful, beautiful countryside. And in Amalfi, I struggled with kind of holding the guidance, and so I would fall into the planning and all that, and everything would be off, and then I would surrender. And so like a few days I was going up and down, and finally I just surrendered, and I was on the bus, and I ran into this American couple, older couple. He was a poet. I think she was a teacher. And we really hit it off. It was wonderful. They invited me to come with them to the island of Capri, where they had a pension there, and they said, there's plenty of room, come on. And I did. I went there and we hung out for a couple of weeks on the island of Capri. It was wonderful. And one day during this time on the island, he and I, the poet, were sitting and having, I think, some wine at a sidewalk cafe, just talking about life and stuff like that. And somehow I got to talking about my last girlfriend. And as I was talking, he started looking at me very strange, and he said, I have to ask this, I don't know why, but was your girlfriend's name so-and-so? And I just looked, and I said, yes. And he started crying. It was his daughter that he was estranged from for many years, and he had no idea how she was or where she was. And he asked me all about her, and I told her about it. It was just this incredible, beautiful experience. And as I was sitting there, I realized, how could this happen? What forces brought me here to this moment? It's like the coincidence was just too great, and it just, in that moment, I just sunk really deep into surrender, and just for the rest of my trip, I think, probably the next 4 or 5 weeks, I was in that state. And in that state, I ended up having an affair in Paris, meeting incredible people all along the way. It was just amazing. So when I got back, I ended up going back to school for transpersonal psychology, and when it came time to do my dissertation, I struggled with what to do. I kept thinking about what would be best for my career, what would be best, for this or that, for the school. And I had a great advisor, Arthur Hastings, who passed away, and may he rest in peace. Beautiful, beautiful man. Thank you, Arthur. And he said, you have to find a question that you want answered for yourself, and it'll take you through the dissertation process, because it's a very hard process. You need passion. You need to want to know the answer to the question you're asking. And so I thought about it, and I kept struggling, but I just didn't get it. And finally, a dear friend of mine was coming up from LA, and he said, why don't you meet me in Big Sur? It'd be good for you and all that. So I said, why not? Went down to Big Sur, which has always been a very transformative place for me. For some reason, I don't know why, every time I'm in Big Sur, it's like my consciousness opens up. Something happens to me. And this time, we were driving in, my wife and I, and as I saw that beautiful coast, I just started crying, and all the stuff that I had been holding all fell away, and I just got into this really receptive state. And strangely enough, we stopped at, I think, Pfeiffer Park Lodge, whatever that lodge is, where they have the big park there. And I was in the bathroom, and in the bathroom stall, and there it was, suddenly, boom, seeking, receiving, and following divine guidance. What are the basics across cultures and across religions? Are there universals to how we seek, receive, and follow guidance? And that was and I got it through guidance, and so I went back, and the whole process was amazing, hard, but amazing. And I developed a synthesized or integral approach to guidance. I discovered many universal patterns. I interviewed 9 spiritual teachers from different traditions. They were wonderful. And I also experienced, I, I did guidance throughout the research and sought guidance to seek the research. And what I would do is, before I would interview someone, I would attempt to use a guidance procedure from their tradition. And by the time I got to the interview, I had already been experiencing a lot of what they talked about, but it was kind of like there were things that they started talking about that I didn't know from the practice or from the book, but I was experiencing it. So I got this great kind of visceral experience of these systems. And so I synthesized it, and I've been continuing to do this lived inquiry. I put up a website, and I have people sending in stories to me. I continue to do this research both in my life and in studying. So this is this is one of my streams, and I've kind of synthesized it into the integral theory and practice as well, and discovered, there's a lot of integral theory is a great kind of way to map an experience, to see all the different parts of the experience, and kind of helps you to discover the hidden frameworks there. And so that really helped me take the guidance process even farther. And in a way, I've kind of reached a point where I recognize that what we call divine guidance is really guidance from a source that is beyond ourselves. It could be the Buddha nature, it could be God, it could be Jesus, it could be the Tao, it could be the higher self, the higher power. However we frame it, this source is beyond our construct fields. So whatever construct field we put on it, it's just the construct field. But it is this force beyond our comprehension, because it's beyond the world of form. This is what all the traditions hold. And with integral theory, I started to recognize that we could also frame this as the evolutionary impulse. So we're seeking the guidance of the evolutionary impulse within us and within all beings and within all the universe. If you're spiritual or religious, it still can be that the divine is kind of channeling through this evolutionary impulse. If you're not so inclined, there's a lot of people, even in the science community, who recognize that there's a driving intelligence. Intelligence design has gotten a bad rap, but there is a kind of, especially in quantum theory, there's a recognition that as things unfold, as things evolve, systems and beings evolve, there's a drive towards greater complexity, and greater depth and span, we call it in integral. And one of the integral theorists, Gene Gebser, actually talked about seeking the guidance of the inner commission. And the way he talked about it was very much how Wilber talks about the evolutionary impulse. So Gebser actually talked about seeking the guidance from the evolutionary impetus. And so that marries beautifully with the idea of transcendent education that I got in my research. That most traditions hold that when the divine guides us, it's usually to give us an educational experience, a transcendent educational experience, which means to help us evolve towards being closer and closer to contact with the divine. So anyway, so now I basically hold and do work through evolutionary guidance for myself and others. What does this moment, what is this situation, these events, how do I hold these? How do I look at these from an evolutionary perspective, from the evolution of my own life, my own being, from that of the culture and society? And one of the things I discovered is tapping into the movies and the history of movies and its evolution, the moving image, is a great tool to kind of give us a visceral sense of the evolutionary arc in society, in the world around us. In terms of these are stories being told, these are stories that have evolved. I discovered in my research applying integral theory to film, I discovered that the moving image goes through these evolutionary cycles, and then it splits off into another form. So you have the silent film evolving from archaic structure to integral structure over those years, and then when sound comes in, they had to retool everything, and it went back to archaic, and then evolved through integral, and then came television, and they split off. And so there's this process. I'll talk more about this some other time. But so experiencing that and like observing this flow, this kind of, and the stories that take us through these kind of phases, helps us to viscerally kind of feel the evolutionary stream within and around us. So you can see how all of these kind of interconnect for me. So I think this is enough for today, but I'll get back to this at some point. So blessings, and I'll leave you with a guidance, little meditation, adapted from the Course in Miracles with an integral spin. This holy instant would I give to you. Be you in charge, for I would follow you, certain your direction gives me peace. And if I need a word to help me, you will give it to me. If I need a thought, that will you also give it. And if I need but stillness and a tranquil open mind, these are the gifts I will receive of you. You are in charge by my request, and you will hear and answer me because you speak for my highest and deepest and most expansive source. Namaste. Peace out.